Hi, I'm Jason Tyndall, General Manager at Nature Play SA, and I'll be taking you through a snapshot of the importance of sensory play with my colleague Nara Zolo. We are all sensory beings. Whatever we do in our lives, whether or not we are looking at the clouds and we're watching them go by, whether or not we're feeling the wind in our face, walking through a forest, these are experiences that we seek. These are experiences that we are drawn to. And the foundation of those experiences goes right back to childhood. And in childhood, it is a very, very unique window of development, particularly from a sensory perspective. So when we look at childhood and their experiences, particularly in a daycare setting, then we look at the spectrum of opportunity. How sensory are these opportunities that we are providing our children? Do we even know? So if we look at today's generation, we see a lot of children getting overstimulated in different senses. So it may be sight, it may be hearing through, for example, watching television. We start to see a gap where other senses have to play catch up. And that gap can cause some problems later in life. So what we want to ensure is that we are making sure that all of the senses of a child, so seeing, listening, tasting, hearing, tactile, all of those elements are getting lots and lots of different opportunities. Sensory play has a broad range of benefits, particularly for children in a daycare setting. So let's start with problem solving, because everywhere children are going in life, they're solving problems. So from a sensory perspective, if you imagine we have a workbench or a mud kitchen, and on that mud kitchen we have dirt, we have flowers, we have sticks, we have a range of different natural elements. And the first problem that a child wants to solve is how do we turn this clog of dirt into mud? Obviously that problem can be solved by adding some water, but how much water? And what quantity of water? Now we can easily go in and say, oh, we'll make that for you and stir it up and there you go, make your mud pie. But the really important learning is children mixing and experimenting. What happens if I add some flowers, or they just rub it in their fingers and they squelch? And if they squelch, what that does is it starts to send messages to the brain. And those messages to the brain are really important connections for sensory development to really start to strengthen. Out of that also comes sustained play. And sustained play is long periods of time where children play uninterrupted. And sometimes we see children, they play and they come to us and they say, oh, we're bored and we don't like doing this. But what we see is when it's a sensory experience, there's so much reward and incentive coming out of that, that children are engaged for longer. And when they're engaged for longer, there are a lot more cognitive benefits happening in the brain. For babies, in a family daycare setting, babies are really important when it comes to sensory play and sensory experiences. Dry, wet, even mud. And what this does, you'll see that babies will react straight away. They'll react because they're like, oh, that's different. That's a really important sensory experience. And we keep giving these and exposing our babies to these sensory experiences that starts to set them up to engage and to seek those sensory experiences in play. As children get older, 3, 4 years old, we start to see imagination come to life. We start to see things like, I've made this mud pie with 3 flowers on it for my friend the Gruffalo. So you've made that for the Gruffalo, and I'm going to add a cup of this orange dirt onto my mud pie because we think the Gruffalo is really going to like that. So we start to see not only imagination, we see literacy, we see numeracy, we see problem solving, we see all these other elements, all possible within a family daycare setting. And of course we've got the development of the whole child, the whole sensory system.
The first thing that I would want to do when setting up for sensory play would be to take a barefoot walk outside. I'd have a look at the different levels I have in the backyard, the things that I can see and smell and hear. I consider what my backyard is like at different times of the day and in different weather. I'd also take a look at my current resources. What do I have at the moment? Because sensory play doesn't cost a lot of money to set up. We can use things as simple as sticks and stones, different coloured leaves, sand, dirt, with some water and pebbles, even scented flowers like lavender and rosemary. And then I'd fill the gaps. I'd look at what tools I might need for the children, what they might like to use, and the basic infrastructure that would help make really deep sensory play. Perhaps consider setting up some workbenches, putting out some pots and pans, little child-sized mortar and pestles, and rigging up some cloths to section out the garden so there's little nooks and crannies for children to play when they feel like they want to be alone. At that point, I would set up some scenes like a little mud kitchen, and I would have some stones for grinding together to make some pigments. And then I'd get the children to come in and I'd see what works and what holds their interests, because children like to play in different spaces, and some like to play collaboratively and some like to play alone at times. And at the end of the day, I'd see what held their interest, and then I'd work to rearrange that space the following day to see if we can make it really deeply engaging for those children the next day.
And that calming environment is really important for children, because what we find is in a loud, noisy world where there's lots of big feelings happening, it's really important to have those spaces where children can retreat to. And as adults, we love to do calming things, as do children. And children can't articulate their emotions like we can. What they do is they interpret it through the spaces they're in. So having a sensory environment will ensure that children also have opportunity to calm and to self-regulate their emotions.